Paranormal M explores the places fear refuses to go. From cursed relics to haunted souls, the stories linger. Subscribe if you dare to follow the trail. And if you see that little shape that looks like well, to me it looks like an open picnic basket, I think it's a thumb. Do something to that button, please. On to the stories. The Ghost of Willow Road. I'll try to keep this short, but what I'm about to tell you is a very real experience that happened to a friend and me. We were both 14 at the time. This was late summer of 1996, maybe sliding into early fall. My family owned a patch of recreational land out in the lower hills of the Appalachian Mountains, near the Tennessee River in North Alabama. Still have it, actually. This time of year, we always went up to clear trails and hang deer stands and get ready for hunting season. My dad was on the old John Deere prepping food plots while my buddy and I trailed him on the ATV, clearing fallen branches with a small chainsaw so we could pass. We eventually reached the far edge of the property and got thirsty. We decided to swing back to the cabin for some drinks, and instead of taking this narrow trail, we used one of the two small asphalt roads that cut through the tiny community nearby. Off one of those roads was a dirt path called Willow Road. It led to a small but active cemetery that's still used today. The road went straight into the graveyard, looping around in one big circle, so there was only one way in and one way out. The cemetery itself was surrounded by dense dark underbrush and pine on both sides. It had this, I guess you could call it a trail, and it ended right at the top of it. A gate there led straight to our cabin, maybe 300 or 400 yards away over a little ridge, a kind of back entrance. As we came around the bend where the cemetery came into view, we saw somebody sitting exactly at the start of the loop. We were about 100 yards out. We slowed down, trying to be respectful. After all, it was still an active cemetery. At first, we thought maybe it was a relative of somebody buried there, maybe somebody tending graves. But as we drew closer, we noticed details. It was a man, and he looked African American. Honestly, had very little color to him at all. Almost like ash. He wore faded denim overalls and no shirt underneath and bare feet. He was sitting on an old concrete block set upright like a stool, no car, no bike. No hint of how he got there. As we passed, he gave no sign of emotion, and I threw up my hand in a small wave anyway. Kept going to our gate. It was unlocked, so we zipped over to the cabin. I hopped off the ATV and left it running and ran inside for 2 bottles of water. Maybe 2 minutes tops. My friend asked if I knew who that guy was. No clue, I said. But we're going back the same way. When we did, he was gone, completely. Not just him, but the concrete block was gone too. It was as if nothing had ever been there. The road ahead was straight and empty. And the road itself runs maybe 1.5 miles before it dead ends at a heavily gated government property. Cemetery Road branches off about a half mile before that. My dad is working at this food plot nearby. Food plot? So, when we rolled up, I asked if he'd seen anyone, and he looked puzzled and said, "No, why?" We told him what happened, and he laughed. Thought we were pulling his leg. Said nobody had come through it at all. And to this day, that stretch has maybe 60 residents across 9 miles, hardly a busy area. We never brought it up again with Dad. But my friend and I both knew what we'd seen. Something. A ghost, most likely, I guess. And even now, we still talk about it from time to time. The part that sticks with me are those blocks weigh over 40 pounds. Even if he'd gone off into the woods, how can he carry through all that brush without a sound? Fast forward to spring of 2006. We lived about 25 minutes away at that point. So one evening, severe storms rolled through. My dad's out of town on business, and I was at my cousin's place when he called. Asked if we could check on the cabin. Bring chainsaws and tarps, he said. Apparently just in case. That doesn't sound good. We arrived around 9 p.m. and it was dark and the power was out and still raining. And as we unlocked the gate to the driveway, an SUV pulled in right behind us. I figured it was someone lost. A woman rolled down her window, eager to speak. She asked if we were the owners, and I said yeah, and handed me her card and told me to call her soon under the better conditions. She said she was an investigative journalist who now wrote about ghosts and local folklore. She's working on a piece about the area and wanted an interview for my family. Back home, I tossed the card in the counter. A couple of days later, Dad got home and saw it. He asked, and we called her. A week later, she came by to interview us. She asked if we'd ever seen anything strange on the property, and without thinking, we both said no, and hit us at the same time. And I told her the story. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, she said. She'd already interviewed at least 10 other locals, and every single one had described the same man. She'd done her research and found what she believed was his grave in a near-forgotten cemetery, with fewer than a dozen stones. Only one stone had writing, and it was carved by hand. Here lays Ezekiel, born 1783 and buried in 1849. She believed he'd been a slave owned by one of the large plantations once in the area. Perhaps a man of some status among the enslaved. She eventually published a book of short stories about local hauntings. Gave us a copy when it came out. Wish I could tell you the title, but over the years of moving, it's been lost. Still, the whole thing was real, and every time I think about it, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. Sorry about the plane sounds. I can't do anything about it. The house on Willow Creek Road. My grandparents built the house on Willow Creek Road back in 1963. And for its time, it was absurdly large, nearly 8,000 square feet, and even today, it would still be considered massive. It was a federal-style home, it wasn't Georgian. But the same two long wings stretched from either side like open arms. It sat quietly at the edge of a rural town, surrounded by, oak trees and thick brush. My grandfather passed away in 1999, and not in the house, but at the hospital after a sudden stroke. Nobody had ever died in that house. My grandmother remarried in 2004, moved to a smaller brick home on the opposite side of town. I was in my second year of college then. My parents had sold their old home and were planning to build a new one, but needed a place to stay in the meantime. So we moved into the big house temporarily. Since I was in and out constantly, I claimed the old music room as my bedroom. The entire left wing of the house, basically. Had its own front and back door, so I could come and go without waking anyone up. The room was a sprawling 1,400 square foot thing with a built-in a built-in wet bar. I almost said something funny. And there were also some storage closets and its own bathroom with a private entrance. During the summer, my friends practically lived there. Poker nights, late basketball games on TV, beer and pizza, and all the usual college guy rituals. One Friday night, we hosted a poker tournament. It lasted until almost 3 a.m. And by the time everyone left, the metal trash can near the bar, like a massive old thing that took a contractor bag, was nearly full of beer cans and snack wrappers. I shoved it back against the wall like always and latched both doors and went to bed. At 4:30 a.m., I woke to a single loud crash, the loudest one I'd heard in my life. It was as if somebody had hurled that trash can across the hardwood floor. The lid had popped off and cans scattered across the room. It was pitch black, but I could hear them rolling. I didn't hesitate, pure flight, not fight. Bolted out of the music room into the main house and sprinted straight to my parents' bedroom. I scared him half to death, and my dad's first words were, "Are you drunk?" And I begged him to grab his pistol because somebody had to be in there. As we crept through the den into the kitchen, I could hear something dragging its feet across the cans. My dad whispered, "What the hell is that?" I whispered back, "I'm not crazy, I heard it too." We reached the dining room. The noise stopped, and when we flipped on the lights, the room was a disaster. Cans everywhere, lid in the corner. Both doors still dead-bolted shut. There was nobody there, and we checked every closet, under the sink, behind the island, the shower, even the crawlspace door. Nothing. My dad called the police at 4:55 a.m. They came through the entire house, all the doors locked, no sign of forced entry, and they found nothing either. Later that morning, my dad phoned my grandmother, tell her about the strange night. She wasn't shocked. She admitted that weird things had happened since 1994, even when my grandfather was still alive. Kitchen cabinet doors swinging open and drawer handles twisted halfway off. And in the formal sitting room, a forbidden space when I was a kid, she said footprints would appear in the carpet even though no one went inside. And she'd kept quiet because she didn't want people thinking she was losing her mind. We moved out a few weeks later when parents bought their new house. My grandmother put the old place up for sale, and 6 days after the for sale sign went up, the neighbor across the street woke at 2 a.m. and saw the house on fire. By the time the firefighters arrived, the place was engulfed. They looked for signs of squatters and they found nothing. The fire marshal later said it began with this shared wall between the dining room and the music room and the kitchen. The very places where activity had always been strongest. I'm 45 now, and that night still makes my skin crawl. I don't know what was in that house or why it chose us, but whatever it was felt bigger and heavier than just my imagination. The Whispering Acres. In 1994, I purchased about 180 acres of woodland for weekend escapes. Jeez. Over the years of hiking and scouting the property, we stumbled upon 3 undocumented cemeteries. The stones were crudely hand-carved and weathered to near nothingness. No names, no dates. Some were just blank slabs sticking up from the soil. In 2002, I decided to put up a small timber frame cabin and ditch the old camper. And from the very first week of construction, it felt like I'd stirred up something that didn't want to be disturbed. Since then, I've walked into cabins only to find it looking like there'd been, basically the whole thing tossed up by a storm. Chairs overturned, cups smashed on the floor, and drawers open, but not a single lock broken. No windows cracked, nothing stolen, just chaos. Random, unsettling chaos. It was the night before deer season. Don't know when that is. I invited a few close friends to stay over and hunt with me at dawn. We rolled in around dusk, and we had a plan too. Cook some venison steaks, crack a few beers, and relax around a campfire. At around 9 p.m. on a crisp Saturday night, we're swapping stories around the fire pit when everybody started getting hungry. I ducked inside to grab the marinated steaks off the counter, and as I stepped back out, one of the guys barked. Woof! You didn't have to hit Pete with a branch. You could have just thrown it on the ground, and everybody laughed nervously. What are you talking about? I asked. You just hit him with that stick and nearly knocked him over. I've been inside, dude. Sure enough, lying at Pete's feet was a stick, and it was maybe 2.5 feet long and 2 inches thick. Way too big to have just fallen. There was no wind, no trees within 50 feet of the fire pit. Pete rubbed the side of his head. I was just standing here and back to the fire, and I hear it whooshing through the air, and then wham! He thought I was pranking him. They all rushed over to me and then darted back inside for rifles and pistols and flashlights. Someone muttered something. They said, "There's something in those woods." We slipped out through the front door, moving quietly to the corner of the cabin. From there we could hear it, slow, deliberate crunching of leaves about 100 feet off from the woods. We turned on our flashlights and swept the beams through the trees. The area was clear, no underbrush, nothing to hide behind, but the sound kept moving. 6 grown men, lifelong hunters, all frozen like kids. The sound finally faded, and the rest of the night went on without incident. But none of us forgot it. Years later, our kids are old enough to join us this time. We hosted a bigger get-together with the same crew, plus a few more. The boys wanted to hang out, or rather hike out, to one of the cemeteries I'd mentioned before. After dinner, we all geared up, flashlights, sidearms, and started down that trail. It's about 400 yards to the cemetery, a wide path under tall pines. Halfway there, I caught something out of the corner of my ear, a faint, steady step-for-step movement in the brush just off the path. I shook it off at first, and my buddy eased up beside me and whispered, "Who else is out here?" And that's when my stomach fell. I stopped the group and I hissed for silence, and John, the same guy from the stick incident, leaned in and said quietly, "It's that thing again from years back." We swung our flashlights into the trees. Nothing, but the sound was closer now, maybe 20 feet away, clear as day. No animal, no person. Just footsteps that weren't ours. We ran, all of us, back to the cabin like kids sprinting from a dare, and to this day I don't know what's in those woods. But I don't want the trails at night anymore. Eyes at the glass, and whisper in the dark. The first story happened a long, long time ago. I must have been around 9 years old. My uncle back then lived in New Mexico, not far from a dry stretch of farmland that felt endless to me. He had this huge house, at least huge to 9-year-old me. Me, my mom, and my younger brother were all assigned to one room together. The room we stayed in, it was right next to the kitchen and living room. On the wall, facing the front yard, not a real yard, more like a dusty clearing of sorts. Anyway, there's this giant window, and it's stretching almost the whole wall. There were curtains, but they were thin, and a single bed stood in the middle of the room, facing the door, which sat to the right of the window. My mom had the bed, while me and my brother had to sleep on air mattresses on the floor. I chose to sleep closest to the window. One night, maybe a few days before we left, I woke up in the middle of the night. I sat up, still groggy, and looked toward the window, and the room was dark and there were no lights on anywhere. But I saw 2 dim yellow eyes staring at me. They were so close to the glass it felt like they were inside the room. The only way I can describe it, it's like a skinny wolf, but not really. It was taller than any wolf I'd seen on TV, with its fur patchy and its frame almost human-like. Wolves shouldn't have been there anyway. I mean, only wild dogs and coyotes roam that area. We stared at each other for what felt like forever until it darted away. My heart was pounding. Scrambled out of the room, ran to the kitchen where my dad and uncle were sitting on the island. They were drinking coffee and whispering about something. Well, I told them what I'd just seen. My uncle set his mug down and stepped outside to check, leaving me and my dad in a strange buzzing silence that made my ears ring. I came back a few minutes later, and from my memory, he looked different. It was him, but he was pale and shaky. He said, "There's nothing out there, kiddo. Must have been your imagination. Gently moved my air mattress across the room next to my brother, away from the window. Then he pulled the curtain shut. To this day, my uncle swears he doesn't remember any of this happening. And this next story, well, much more recent. Not brand new, but easily one of the scariest things I've felt. It left me crying for hours, actually. I'd stayed up a little bit too late, scrolling on my phone, looking at weird cats doing other things to weird cats. Went to bed around 1 a.m. So like always, I turned toward the wall to sleep, leaving the rest of my room behind me. I switched off the lights, and I let the room settle into darkness. I must have just fallen asleep when I felt the air shift, like a strange tension creeping in. Then, clear as day, a voice right behind me whispered, "Hey." A freezing chill swept up my neck like a hand pressing against the base of my skull, and an electric jolt shot through my body and I couldn't move. I don't know how long it lasted. My eyes snapped open and I sat up trembling. My heart was thundering and tears spilled out of me before I even realized it, and I felt violated and shaken. Finally lay back down, facing the open room, and cried myself back to sleep. The next morning I had a pounding headache at the back of my head. My whole body felt like lead. And even now, when I think or talk about it, even typing this, I get that same faint static-like feeling. Still not sure if it was human. These days, I've drawn a firm line with the spirits in my space. No touching, no messing with me, at least not in my bedroom. And since setting that boundary, nothing has happened, and what unsettles me, though, is that most of these ghosts seem to follow me from the cemetery. The cemetery isn't even close to my home, but even just driving past it feels like something latches onto me. Some of these spirits are harmless, and others not so much. The only reason I think I haven't been overwhelmed is because of the shadow figure. He stands in my doorway like a doorman, silent and still. And sometimes I see him clearly. He doesn't do much, but his presence makes me feel safer. Well, that's good. Things I wasn't supposed to see. I'll be straight with you. I'm one of those people who's had more than their fair share of strange, unexplainable moments. Even since I was little, I don't believe I'm chosen or really spiritually tuned in or anything dramatic like that. I just think I pick up on things. I can tell when the tiniest object in a familiar room has been moved. Not because I'm Sherlock Holmes, but because the atmosphere feels off. I'm not the type who spins ghost stories for attention. Well, I do know a few who do, so just trust me on that. And if you knew me, you'd know that I don't shrug off odd noises or brush things aside as just my imagination. I'm actually hyper-aware. Some say high-strung, others say borderline paranoid, but either way, I try to solve mysteries before labeling them paranormal. The stories below, they're just the ones I couldn't explain. Narrator scrolls down to below. The Mirror Room. Back in middle school, there was this little dressing room-style bathroom off the gym that we all half-joked was haunted. It really wasn't even a real bathroom. It had 2 toilets and separate stalls and 3 odd mirrors on the wall and smelled faintly of bleach. My friends and I were a tight group, the kind of kids who'd stay up at sleepovers watching horror movies way too gory for 12-year-olds. Then we would dare each other and go in there alone. The big joke was that the cracked mirror above the middle sink watched you. So, one afternoon between classes, I got a hall pass and I went there alone. The setup matters. You push through a heavy blue door with one of those hydraulic closers that hiss like a snake when it shuts. And inside, you take a sharp left to get past a privacy screen. 3 sinks sit on a counter to your right. opposite a row of 2 regular stalls and 1 larger stall at the back. The space in front of the regular stalls feels cramped, almost like a tunnel, but in front of the larger stall, there's this weird alcove with a low bench and a long-forgotten changing area nobody used anymore. Out of habit, I chose the smaller of the 2 stalls. A minute or so later, I heard the door creak and hiss open. Someone had come in. I saw their sneakers from under the stall door, and they were tiny and glittery and purple ones. The kind with the rhinestones on the side, but scuffed up like they'd been dragged through mud, and they passed my stall quietly. I figured they went to the big stall to the left, so I finished up thinking I'd walk them back to their class when they were done. The little kid classrooms were way on the other side of the school. The girl couldn't have been more than 1st grade. When I came out to wash my hands, I realized all the stall doors were open. No one there, and the stall was too empty, even peeking to the alcove. No kid under the bench, not in the corner where the old shower was. No one nowhere. And muddy footprints on the whole tile. Went back to class a shade paler, and suddenly the jokes about the mirror room didn't feel like jokes anymore. The street corner phantom. Fast forward to my first year of high school, around 2017. I just finished my weekly ballet class across town. My uncle came to pick me up, and it was early winter, about 9 p.m. It was pitch dark. He took a back road he liked, a narrow strip lined with auto shops, a locksmith, and a run-down accounting office. Hardly any streetlights. There's this squat little building at the corner. I always noticed it because its address was 3131. Double numbers, and we always pointed out that family quirk. It's shaped vaguely like a house, a brick at the bottom, pale siding on the top, and 2 doors instead of 1, and that night as we turned the corner, I glanced at it, and something was different. The right-hand door was cracked open, and a man was peeking out, and he was Latino, maybe mid-30s, holding the door frame like a lifeline. His face was unforgettable. Wide eyes, mouth slightly open, and sheer panic etched across the whole bit of it. So I followed his gaze into the darkness. There was a figure standing maybe 10 feet from him. At first, I thought it was another man, and then I realized I could see the car repair window shop. It was lit up like a sign, and it was going through his body. It was a shadow standing upright, and it had a shape, a long coat like a trench coat, or broad-brimmed hat it seemed like, and he was impossibly tall. Maybe 7 feet, if that, and something like a walking stick in one hand. I turned my head as far as I could keep it in sight while we passed, and from every angle I could still see through it. The light above the door glowed right through its quote-unquote chest, and it cast no shadow. "Did you see that?" asked my uncle. "See what?" he said, glancing at me. I didn't ask him to turn back, and I didn't want to, and the next time we drove by, everything looked normal. A few weeks later, the business had a for lease sign, and I never found out what happened there. I'd never heard of the Hat Man at the time, but months later I stumbled on a forum post and realized I'd seen almost exactly what people had described. The nursery radio. This one scared me the most because it felt directed at me. It was either late 2017 or early 2018. I was a sophomore. My church met in a converted warehouse, not some centuries-old cathedral like it had concrete floors and fluorescent lights and folding chairs. I'd always felt a weird energy in that back hallway, but I'd brush it off as just my nerves. One Wednesday night after youth group, everybody had gone home except me and my mom, and she had the keys. She was watering plants in the main hall and asked me to check for any leftover mess. In the nursery, one of the toy sets was out on the back counter, along with an ancient battery-powered AM radio we never used. I tidied up and reached for the light switch to leave, and something in me whispered, "Wait." So I stood there, staring at an empty room, feeling ridiculous. Then the radio switched on and static hissed loudly and the dial moved on its own. It was clicking through stations. A man's voice came through and it was deep and warped by the noise. It was either speaking another language or something, because I didn't know the words drowned in that static. It lasted maybe 20 seconds and then silence. The radio clicked off by itself. I stood frozen, waiting for it to come back on. Instead, a smell crept across the room. Not sulfur exactly, but something sharp and metallic, like old pennies and damp earth. That's when I bolted. I ran to the kitchen where my mom was rinsing out a watering can. No strange smells there, no reason for a scent like it to drift all the way from the nursery. And even now, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was on the other side of that radio, it wasn't random. It felt like it was for me. So, to wrap it all up, why does this stay with me? Well, most of the weird things I've experienced feel like I'm peeking through a crack in reality, but these 3 moments, the kid with no footprints, the shadow man on the street corner, and the radio in the nursery, feels like they're carved into me like stone. Maybe they're coincidences, maybe I was stoned, maybe not, but I know what I saw, and I wasn't supposed to, I don't think. The Hollow Beneath the Stairs. For the past month, I've been noticing some really strange and unnerving things in my house. And I've lived here for almost a decade now, and nothing like this has ever happened before. But lately it feels like something has shifted, like the air itself is heavier. I hear faint whispers at night, and sometimes I catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. Every time I turn to look, there's nothing there, and it all started with this nightmare. I dreamed about a boy being drowned in a shallow pond. It was so vivid that I woke up gasping for breath, and a few days later, I got into a rideshare car. Out of nowhere, the driver asked if I still lived at that address redacted. Clever. When I said yes, he asked if I knew the story about that house. I didn't, so I asked really what he was meaning. He told me a man had been murdered in the front yard. Ugh. Strangled, not drowned. And as soon as he said that, I felt this icy wave roll through me. It's like all the warmth had drained from my body. I did some digging online and found out my house had been hit by an artillery during World War II. Jeez. Later used as an emergency shelter. The only part they properly rebuilt was the kitchen floor. They'd reinforce it with steel, but the crawl space beneath it is still hollow. That area has always made me uneasy. I never paid much attention to it until now. Since then, things have only gotten worse. The dreams are more intense. One night I dreamed of a woman standing at the end of my hallway. She had shoulder-length black hair, no shoes, and wore a gray dress. The most disturbing part was her eyes. They were wide open but completely blank, like she'd been staring at something I couldn't see. I woke up screaming. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in my own home. Another night, I dreamt my house was filling with water instead of fire. It came pouring from the ceiling and the walls. I've had that happen 2 or 3 times. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The next morning, my carbon monoxide alarm, not the smoke alarm, it started blaring at 3:11. I checked the entire house. There's no leak, no gas, but the alarm wouldn't stop. I unplugged it, and 2 minutes later it started again, and this time louder. No explanations for it. But the worst dream I had was about my brother. I saw him crash his bicycle on a wet road, and it was so real that I woke up shaking. The next day I told him about it, and we laughed it off as one of my weird nightmares. But later that afternoon, he actually fell off his bike on the way to work, and thankfully he wasn't seriously hurt, but the timing freaked me out. Now at night, I keep seeing figures in the garden, dark and distinct shapes. They don't move like people, and they're just there at the edges of the shadow and just watching. They vanish as soon as I focus on them. I know I'm not imagining it. Everything feels wrong. The air, the silence, even the light seems dimmer. It's getting harder and harder to ignore, and I don't know what to do anymore. Has anyone else been through something like this? Has anyone else had a problem saying the word through? Because right now, it feels like my house isn't just haunted, it's waking up. The woman on floor 15. I'm a 28-year-old male. Work as a logistics coordinator for a sprawling multi-department company. My office sits on the 19th floor of a glass and steel high-rise planted right in the city's business district. Most days are a haze of purchase orders and schedules and color-coded spreadsheets glowing on my 2 monitors. Other days I actually leave my desk and I walk to my assigned sites, and in this building, I technically oversee a few staff members. 5 of them, but they're scattered across different levels and I almost never see them. 2 weeks into the job, I learned something odd. 3 entire floors in the middle of the tower, floors 12, 15, and 16. They're completely unleased. Nearly 900 square meters of shadowy, soundless rooms lined with paper-thin partitions and dull gray carpets. Each floor still has its own set of 3 bathrooms, men's, women's, and accessible ones. Their cleaners visit them only once a month, at least if no tenants are present. Nothing about this arrangement seemed unusual until the elevator stopped. One Thursday evening, heading down from my 19th floor office, the elevator slowed and chimed at floor 15. I thought someone was getting on. I glanced out, and there was nothing but a dim hallway. My chest tightened. This was one of the vacant floors. I stepped back inside, eyes darting at the buttons, but only the ground floor was lit. My finger hovered over closed doors, and nothing happened. The doors refused to budge, and panic flickered, and I stepped out and pressed the call button from the hallway. I was hoping another elevator would arrive, but behind me, my elevator door slid shut. I reached for him, a bit too late. Now I was alone, truly alone, on floor 15, with only the muffled whine of wind pressing against the building's skin. My instincts told me to take the fire stairs, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable echo of a bathroom stall door clicking shut in the woman's restroom. I froze, and the restroom door stood slightly ajar, a faint draft slipping through. But these doors, they have hydraulic closures. They never stay open on their own. Someone or something had to be inside holding it. So I bolted through the fire escape, down the stairs, and out into the lobby carpet in what felt like a single heartbeat. At the security desk, I blurted out what happened, and it gave me the look people reserve for the unhinged. One guard muttered something about an employee from another office sneaking in for privacy. Still, 2 of them came with me. We swept the entire floor, and it was empty. No one in the women's room, no one in the men's, and all the stalled doors were locked. Maidens hadn't touched them in weeks. I told myself to forget it. Days passed. I returned to my spreadsheets and coffee, convinced the moment had been a weird glitch in my brain, and late Friday afternoon, 3 security staff appeared at my door, and they wanted me to recount everything again. As I spoke, they exchanged glances that made my skin crawl. When asked what was wrong, one finally told me. No one was on that floor. Security footage showed nothing. No movement, no figures, not even me. I blinked and I said, "Are you sure it was 4:15? "Yeah," I said. Every floor has a big sort of silver number by the elevator, and I know where I was. They said they'd checked every angle. The only footage they did have was me stepping off the elevator at the ground floor, calm and ordinary, as if nothing had happened. Then they showed me the camera from floor 15, and in the grainy upper right corner, reflected in the glass near the restroom, was a woman's face, pale and watching. I know she's there. I know she knows I am too. I've lost nearly 20 kilos in the past months. I take the stairs now every time. 20 kilograms. That's a lot. Good for you. As long as you have that to lose, anyway. I've looked like the machinist at one point in time, so if you need food, eat it, is all I'm saying. The visitor at 3:11 a.m. Last night was one of the strangest nights of my life, and that's saying something for someone like me. Someone who prides themselves on being logical and skeptical and grounded in reality. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that, and everything in my mind always has an explanation until now. It was around 3:11, that eerie hour when the world is unnervingly quiet. It's when I woke up with this creeping sense that I wasn't alone. My eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim glow of the hallway light seeping through the door. And that's when I noticed a tall, shadowy figure standing by the foot of my bed. What immediately threw me off was my dog Bailey. He never sleeps in my bedroom. He prefers the living room sofa, but there he was, curled up right by my knees. Stranger still, his ears were perked and his eyes locked on the figure. The shadow stood unnervingly still, but its shape was wrong and too thin and too tall. At first, my brain scrambled for something rational, like, was it my roommate or a trick of the light? But when I glanced to the other side of the bed, my boyfriend was there, sound asleep, breathing heavily. I rubbed my face hard, telling myself it was sleep paralysis or some dream haze. Figure didn't dissolve, though, and if anything, it seemed sharper and its head tilted slightly like it was listening. My heart began to race. And then it moved. Slowly and deliberately, it crouched almost like it was reaching toward Bailey. My dog didn't bark, didn't move, just stared, and the sight made my stomach drop. I fumbled for my glasses with my hands trembling, but when I put them on, the figure was still there. Only now its edges were shimmering like heat waves rising from asphalt. My mind screamed for an explanation, but none came. And then, as if aware it was fully awake, the figure pulled what looked like a scarf or hood tighter over its head, and it rose to its full height. It was stretching unnaturally, began drifting toward the door, and it didn't walk, it seemed to glide. I was frozen, my back pressed against the headboard, unable to speak, and finally I shook my boyfriend awake. I was whispering first, and then shouting, "There's someone here, there's someone in the room." He groggily sat up, confused. "What are you talking about? There's nothing here," he mumbled. But Bailey had already scrambled closer to me, pressing against my legs, shivering. And that's what scared me the most. The figure stopped by the door, and it didn't leave, and instead it swayed side to side like it was mocking me. I could feel my breath catching and my chest tightening, and this wasn't supposed to happen. "Turn on the lamp," my boyfriend said, reaching for it. My shaking hand flicked the switch, and the instant warm light flooded the room, and the figure was gone. Bailey wasn't looking at me, or at my boyfriend. His eyes were still trained on the corner near the door, following something invisible. I don't know what I saw, and I've laughed off every ghost story and every video of shadow people, every superstition. This was different. It was too real and felt like I'd glimpsed something that wasn't meant to be seen. The stranger by the window. Last night something happened that I still can't quite wrap my head around. For somebody like me, somebody who prides themselves on, well, you could say being normal instead of paranormal. That says a lot. Supernormal is still cooler. I've always believed there's a logical explanation for everything. But it was 3:15, an hour when even the streets outside my apartment are silent. I woke up with this sharp, unshakable feeling that someone was in the room with me. As my eyes adjusted in the dark, I noticed a faint outline by the window. Not at the foot of my bed this time, but by the window, a tall, shadowy figure. And what made it even stranger is my dog, who never sleeps in my room, he's usually curled up in the living room, was lying right next to me in the blanket. I felt wrong. The figure stood by the window. Its arm moved in slow, deliberate motions, like it was reaching out toward the dog, or maybe toward me. My dog didn't growl or bark, he just stared at it, like he was mesmerized, and for a second I thought it might be my brother playing a prank. He does have keys to my apartment after all. But when I turned my head, my brother wasn't there. He wasn't even staying with me at that night. I rubbed my face hard trying to wake up properly, and I was like, I'm dreaming, I told myself. I'm absolutely dreaming. The figure didn't blur or fade, it stayed, and it looked like its shape was flickering in and out like a bad signal. Put on my glasses, hoping to see more clearly, but the image sharpened instead of disappearing. Still in disbelief, I shifted to sit upright in the bed, keeping my eyes on it. That's when the thing did something that chilled me to my core. It reached up and adjusted the brim of a hat like an old wide-brimmed hat over its head. Not a hood, not hair, but a hat. Then it stepped away from the window, slowly. And as it did this, it seemed to stretch upward like it was taller than the ceiling itself, but somehow fitting inside the room still. My whole body locked up and I couldn't move, and my mind was scrambling for some kind of explanation. That's when I bolted upright and shook my partner awake. Panic was bursting out of me, and I said, "There's something here, it's in my room." My partner blinked at me, groggy and confused, and whispered, "What? There's nothing there." I begged them to look, to really look. They just squinted at the empty corner with the eyes just being dull with that sleep look. Meanwhile, my dog pressed himself against the side, trembling. Not something he ever does, almost like he was shielding me or maybe trying to get comfort. The figure didn't leave. It started swaying back and forth like a slow, mocking dance. It wasn't just a shadow anymore, it was someone. I felt my sanity slipping, like the air was too heavy to breathe, and my partner told me to turn on the lamp. My hand shook as I fumbled for the switch, and the moment the light filled the room, the figure evaporated just like that, gone. My dog's eyes stayed fixed on the same spot by the window, following something I couldn't see. I don't know what to make of it. I've never believed in ghosts or shadow people or any of those stories, but now I'm not so sure. It was real, and it felt real, and it still feels like it's here. I don't know what it was, and for the first time in my life, I don't want an answer. The Whispering Mask. Before you roll your eyes, just listen. 2 summers ago, my cousin Melanie and I bought a dusty old Ouija board from a thrift shop on a dare. We weren't believers, honestly, and we thought the whole ghost thing was ridiculous. But the first time we tried it, the planchette glided across the board like it had a mind of its own. It was answering questions instantly, and we stared at each other, half thrilled, half convinced the other was pushing it. Even when we played it with strangers at a local Halloween event, the answers were so freakishly specific that grown adults were tearing up. Some months passed. We'd speak to distant relatives and random names, and whoever would come through. It became a weird routine. But one afternoon, the board stopped behaving like normal, and in the 4 corners there were small carvings, a dagger, a crescent moon, a black star, and a mask. Normally, the planchette would begin with hello or yes, but now it slid straight to the mask, over and over. We'd ask questions, it wouldn't spell letters, and wouldn't touch numbers, it just sat over the mask like a dog guarding a bone. We tried again the next night, same thing. Mask and no messages. No one else coming through. We joked that we were haunted by the Mask Man. Felt stupid to name it, but we hoped a name might build some kind of a rapport. And strangely, it worked. Little by little, responses returned. Only now, the planchette shot across the board instead of crawling. We'd ask, "What's your name?" or "How old are you?" and nothing was clear, it was just fragments. Weeks went by, and we realized nobody else would come through, just him. And the more we spoke, the more the air in the room seemed to shift, and it felt like the thing was warming up to us. Not in a friendly way, but like a stray dog that starts circling closer every day. It was unsettling. So bored and reckless, we broke one of the rules, and we started asking forbidden questions like, what happens after death, or what's waiting for us? The answers were always garbled, more symbols than words, but still we kept trying. Then out of nowhere we wondered, what if it could reach our minds? I asked it to read mine. It spelled no, and I asked why, and it spelled wise, and my stomach dropped. I'd already had a bad feeling about this thing, but curiosity won over me. I asked if it could read Melanie's mind, and this time it spelled yes. We tried it, and I had to look away, but keep her fingers on the planchette. I'd ask it to spell the word, like song or even random numbers that she was thinking. And almost every time it nailed it, not perfectly, not instantly, but close enough to make my skin crawl around. The only explanation I've ever come up with is that she was somehow moving it. But if she was, she'd never confessed. And even now, I can't get the board to work like it used to. No spirits, no masked man. Nothing, it seemed. Sometimes I wonder if something attached itself to her, and she's been through a lot, and, well, maybe that's why everything stopped after she left. Has anyone else had anything like this happen? Because I still don't know what we let in that summer. The Floating Candle of Maple Street. When I was 13, I'm pretty sure I had an encounter with something. Poltergeist or ghost or spirit, take your pick. Before that night, nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened in my parents' house, and to this day, I haven't seen anything strange there again. A little bit of background. I grew up in a very traditional household, and where supernatural stories weren't taken seriously. The home itself is over a century old, a creaky two-story on Maple Street. My parents always dismissed the noises as pipes or old wood, and my childhood dog would sometimes bark and stare at the top corner of my bedroom wall for no reason. That's not what you think it is. That is my weird stool I'm sitting on. Oh, yeah, that's not me. See? I chalked it up to dog being dog and ignored it, and I even went as far as to do some research. No tragic history tied to the property, no reported hauntings, no deaths, and of course that doesn't mean nothing happened there. But at least on paper the place was squeaky clean. Now for the story. Probably late October, and I'd been reorganizing my room all day. I was moving furniture and stacking books and lighting a lavender-scented candle in a small ceramic holder. Not glass this time. As I was finishing up, the candle slid off my desk, and instead of falling straight down, it drifted, and actually drifted about 6 feet across the room and slammed into my closet door. The ceramic holder shattered into 3 jagged pieces. Before I could process what happened, my bedroom door creaked shut on its own. Not slammed, not pushed, it just slowly swung shut until the latch clicked. Completely freaked out, I ran to find my mom in the kitchen. She calmly suggested it might have been vibrations from a passing truck, and, well, we didn't live near a highway. So I asked if she had felt anything. She said no, and she guessed it could have been my sister playing a prank on me, but she was outside at the time and had no way of pulling such a trick. And that was the one and only time anything like that happened in that house. Even now when I bring it up, my parents shake their heads and admit they have no explanation either. Not the scariest story in the world, but still unnerved me. Felt like something wanted me to notice it just once. Well, if anybody has a theory, I'd like to hear it. If you heard weird noises, it was my chair. That's all I'm saying. The Night of the Bride's Whisper. Starting from the most messed up night of my life in northern Bulgaria, February 2019. We were 7 friends on a dirt road, half drunk around a rusty barrel fire. We were trading scary stories like it was a game. And after the booze dried up and the stories got too creepy, well, we decided it was time to go home. It was about 1:47 a.m. and we decided to walk each other back, one by one, to be polite. But really it was because nobody wanted to walk alone. First we dropped off Milena, then Victor, then Georgie, until only me, Luca, and Stefan were left. They said they were afraid of wild dogs, and that's the excuse everyone uses. But where I'm from, people don't fear dogs, they fear spirits. In my village, encounters with things are so normal your grandma will just shrug and tell you which prayer to use. Luca was the kind of guy who bragged about not fearing anything. So when we left Stefan at his place, Luca suddenly asked if I could walk him home, and that was new. He usually walked me, and he was pale and jittery, and the tough guy mask was gone. My village is one of the poorest in that area. We've got a single cracked asphalt main road with flickering lamps. But the side streets, they're just wet sand, stones, and shadows. I had 3% left on my old Samsung Galaxy S7. Piece of junk would die at 30% sometimes. I turned on the flashlight and we started a 10-minute walk through the pitch darkness. About 60 meters from his house, I told him to go on, and he said, "Come on, man, at least walk me to my door." I felt upside down, like we'd swapped roles, and I walked him to his door, and he even offered me food or a couch until sunrise. I said no, because I wanted my bed, and of course I wasn't stupid enough to walk alone in silence. So I called a girl from town, Christina, the kind who always picks up, and put her on speaker while I used the flashlight to see my steps. When I reached the main road, I killed the flashlight, but I kept her on my ear. Only 5 minutes to my house, 3% battery left. Here's a little bit of an important piece of information. Some of you might have heard it, some not, but look up Legenda Merisei in Akate. The legend of the drowned bride, and the short version is a young bride jumped into the village well on her wedding night. Apparently, that happened after being forced to marry a man that she despised. And old people still tell you to greet her spirit if you pass near the well at night. So guess what? That night I forgot and I was on the phone and distracted. I even sat down on the old wooden bench under the massive willow tree by that cursed well. The place, well, that's where she should have drowned, and it was 2:56. My plan was to keep talking until the phone died, and about 25 minutes in I leaned back to crack my spine. Just as I picked the phone back up, I heard it. It was a female voice, drawn out, slow and playful, but wrong. It was like a joke in slow motion. "David, why does your back hurt? Why are you alone?" I swear I'm writing this with goosebumps running down my arms. The voice was half demonic and half sweet, and my blood froze. So I hurled the phone as far as I could, and for a second, pure panic. Scanning for shadows, my own breath loud in my ears. Found the phone with my hand shaking and screaming into the line. "Who the hell was that? Who's with you? Don't play with me, Christina." The voice came back small and confused. "David, what are you talking about? I'm alone. I didn't say anything." I hung up and the phone died instantly. "Bro, Christina just got taken. Her family says some men broke in around 3 a.m., beat her, and threw 6,000 euros on the table and dragged her away to marry some guy in the next village." "What?" "Yeah, exactly 3 a.m. And that's where my story ends. Oh, righty then. My friends still talk about it, and some say it was just a cruel coincidence, and others say the bride's spirit used Christina's voice to talk to me. Since then, I've had sleep paralysis and glitch moments and shadow things at the edge of my bed. I've gotten used to it. I just shut my eyes, I just pray and I let it pass. Sometimes I sing to myself when I'm scared, lying even to the dark that nothing scares me. And still, every morning, every time I pass under that willow, I say it 3 times without fail. Bunasaria Fata Marie, Bunasaria Fata Marie, Bunasaria Fata Marie. Don't hold me to the pronunciation on that one. There seems to be an issue with my cousin's mother. The situation unfolds after the events concerning my cousin. And for context, read something's wrong with my cousin, essentially. After several months, my cousin's family relocated to a new home. It's because a priest indicated that their previous house was filled with negative energy because it's old. Once they settled into the new place, an incident occurred involving my cousin's mother. One day, while she was just cooking in the kitchen, the only other person at home was her sick aunt, and as she was preparing the meal, she heard her husband's voice outside and assumed he had returned. Shortly after, she heard a knock at the door, so she went to answer it. And upon opening the door, a gust of wind swept through, causing her to fall, and she later claimed to have no memory of what happened after that. Eventually, her husband came home to find her unconscious on the floor. He attempted to revive her and asked the sick aunt about the situation. She explained that she had heard a lot of screaming, but was unable to assist due to the paralysis, and the husband then called other family members for help, and when she regained consciousness, she began to behave erratically, screaming and pulling at her husband. Family members arrived, placed her into a car, during which she threatened one of them, claiming she would kill him, saying that he was a bad person. They took him to a temple where rituals are performed, and the temple priest conducted a ceremony for her, which restored her to her normal state. The priest explained that she was possessed like a very light and open soul, which attracts negative spirits, and that she is an empath who draws a lot of emotions. He mentioned that she has a dual apparition and advised her to strengthen herself both physically and mentally. And after this incident, everything returned to normal, and she's doing well now. Halloween Bumblebee. I like the sound of this one. This happened 2 years ago at a Halloween party I hosted at my college apartment. Every time I'd tell somebody the story, their reactions would either be in disbelief or would just straight up laugh. My party was to start at 7 p.m. Some of my friends sent me a message saying that they were on their way, or that they were pre-gaming at another friend's house. A couple of minutes had passed, and my sister and 2 other friends were getting ready upstairs. That's when we heard my front door unlock. It sounded like somebody was entering my house. I excitedly took a peek from the 3rd floor, looking down the 1st. I live in the 3rd floor. My friend and I saw what looked like our other friend in a bumblebee costume walking down from the 2nd floor to the 1st. I yelled out his name, and he told me to come upstairs and chill with us, but he ignored us. Now, me being excited and all, ran all the way to the 1st floor to catch up with him and ask him what come up, and, well, when I went downstairs, nobody was there. My door was locked, and it didn't seem like anybody entered. It also felt extremely cold, even though I had my windows closed and the heater on. It's as if there was a presence there. Before coming to uni, I've lived in a haunted home in the Philippines for years, so I know what it's like, at least when there's a presence or an entity around. The hairs on my back and my neck are raised when I called my friends to ask if they, stopped by or whatever, and they said they haven't even left and we're still pre-gaming. And to top it off, nobody else in my friend group has a copy of my keys, so it was beyond impossible for them to even enter. I thought I was the only one imagining things, but my friend pulled me over and asked me if I saw what he saw too. Something's wrong with my cousin. This is not about me. It's about one of my cousin's sisters. So for my homeland, there's a lot of rituals, and we're South Indian. There's a lot of tradition where a person gets possessed by God and becomes his messenger. I don't know much about it. It's like a legend, I guess. So what happened was we went to the movies, and it was about a guy who becomes a god and protects his land and people from the devil, the bad people. Something like that. If you want to know more, it's a movie called Kantara. After that day, we tried to imitate the way he was after being possessed. And some days after, our moms come home after work a bit earlier than usual. She came, she looked pretty serious, and we asked what happened, and she told it to us. Our cousins, let's call her S, she didn't go to college because she was sick and had a really bad throat pain. Fortunately, her mother took leave to look after her, and her father didn't have work. The mother was about to take her to the hospital, and she had a phone call. So she went to attend that, and then all of a sudden, S started screaming really loudly. Everybody rushed to see her, and she didn't look normal. She looked a bit tense, and she started to get up and move around almost like an inch above the ground, like floating a bit. Jumping around her father is like a build man. He tried to hold her, but he couldn't, and she was screaming so loud even the neighbors came, and she was just chanting in a different language, and everybody starts freaking out and crying, not knowing what to do. They took her to the hospital, but the people were so confused they told them to go to a psychic. Her whole family was there, and one of her brothers knew a person and called him, and he was far away, but because she's a young girl, he came and started throwing salt or something, and she calmed down. After she came to some sort of consciousness, she told us that she's seeing everyone, and she knows something is wrong, but doesn't know what she was doing. She couldn't talk, almost like being paralyzed. So what are your thoughts about this? More salt, more pepper. The Dream. Early one chilly and frosty winter morning, I had a very vivid dream that I, at once upon waking from it, I knew in my heart to be true, and in the dream it was like I was simply hovering above a close friend of mine's bed. I was watching him as he was lying down. He was very aware of my presence. He was getting gestured for me to hand him a black lighter that was on the floor next to his bed. For a split second, I thought of trying to retrieve it for him to give it to him, but I immediately knew that I couldn't possibly do that for him because I was only a presence right then, not actually physically there in the room flying with him. Since we were able to communicate with each other, I informed him that I was sorry, that I wouldn't be able to actually grab the lighter to hand it to him. He then tried to move toward the edge of his bed to get it, but it was like one whole side of his body wouldn't cooperate for him to be able to grab it. He gave up on the lighter and looked back up at me and tried to speak to me. But since he couldn't speak properly either, I was unable to understand him at all. It was then that he began to fade out of focus as I left the dream in his room and woke up. Upon waking up from that dream, I woke my boyfriend as he slept soundly next to me, and I said to him, "I think Roy just died. I watched him die in my dream just now." This occurred at around 6:30 in the morning. After that, we got up and got ready to go into town and meet up with some friends at our local park as usual. A few hours later, maybe 10 a.m., I was sitting in the grass with one of my girlfriends. I was enjoying a cinnamon roll. It's while our boyfriends were at the store and just off somewhere hanging out. As I licked some of the icing remaining on my fingertips and squinted at her through the morning sunlight, I said to her something like, "Hey, this is going to sound really, really weird, but I need a big favor." "Sure, what is it?" she inquired curiously. "Well, I have this thing with touching dead bodies because I refuse to ever do it, so I'm going to need you to do it to make sure my friend is dead before I call 911. Naturally, her response is something like, "Well, okay, but how the heck do you actually know he's dead?" "Well, it's kind of super hard to explain right now, but I'm pretty sure that I watched him die in a dream this morning." "You serious right now?" she demanded, whilst rolling over in the grass onto her stomach and staring at me with her mouth agape. "Is this like some gift you have or something?" "Not that I've ever known of," I said with a sigh. "But we can't just leave him in there all dead. We have to go check." "Okay then," she said, and she just got up. So since Roy lived right next to the park, we walked right over there and started knocking on his door, which of course he didn't answer. I suggested that we go around to the side French doors where his bedroom was, so that way we could look into his room through the glass panels and try that door as well. She agreed. We went around, hopped over his little white picket fence, and we could peer into his bedroom and see him. And there he was, lying on his back, just as I'd see him lying in my dream. My friend found his door to be unlocked. So she just went right in and checked his pulse, and he's ice cold. She informed me, so he went to go call 911. The police and the fire truck arrived within a few minutes, and as soon as they pronounced him dead, the coroner arrived shortly thereafter. My friend left, and I stayed to hear what the coroner had to say. The coroner said that based on the body temperature, he estimated that Roy had been dead for around 5 hours, which, if you remember, was right around the time that I had that dream. It took several weeks to hear around town what the autopsy found to be the cause of death, which was a massive stroke, explaining while he was unable to move or speak properly. And to this day, I still wish that I knew that he was trying to say to me, or what he was trying to say to me, and also how I was able to see that in my dream. Visitation dream, but in a different way. Several years ago, my beloved aunt passed away. She was my second mother. I've had many fond memories of her as I grew up. She was known for her sense of humor, and we were very close. Those are my dog's ears. She was a quote-unquote person of size who had fallen and broken her hip in her early 60s. Or in her early 60s. After recovering in the hospital, she went to a nursing home to finish rehabilitation. Overall, she was doing well with a good prognosis. I went to bed on April 12th, and I had a dream that everything that still makes me question many aspects of life. For background's sake, probably 20 years before her passing, she had gotten a Halloween gag gift to wear at work. It was a green pair of glasses with the word spooky appearing on a plastic piece above the glasses. She was a pretty animated woman and took great joy looking at people while wearing them, opening her eyes wide and saying spooky in a scary tone of voice. But back to the dream, I found myself sitting in a folding type of a chair in a black room illuminated by one hanging pendant-type light with a large reflector. My aunt was sitting across from me in the same type of chair. I remarked to her, "You died on Friday the 13th. She looked at me and replied, "Spooky," while doing her animated type of face and voice as I described. I woke up the next morning, the 13th, and had a message on my phone from my mom to call her as soon as possible, followed by another message from my dad saying the same. Reached out and found out that she had died that evening. And I've never had a dream about her again since this one time 15 years ago. Now, I always questioned if there was a quote-unquote another side of reality that we just don't understand, but I never expected to have an experience like this. There was no real expectation of death, but there I was telling her that she had died. The Whisper Through the Dog Door. On June 28th, my dog passed away. She had been with me for over a decade, and losing her was like losing a part of myself. She was unusually bright, almost unnervingly so. Sharpest animal I'd ever known. Her ability to learn and to read moods and talk back to me in her own way was unmatched. My husband, knowing I was shattered, brought home a tiny puppy the same evening. Not something I asked for, not something I'd recommend, but I think he wanted to give me a distraction. A living thing to hold on to. First encounter. A few weeks later, I'm sitting in my studio working on my laptop with the new puppy asleep in my lap. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I got a text from my husband. "Come get your puppy." I was confused, and I stood up with the puppy still in my arms and went to the bedroom. He was lying there half asleep, and our other 3 dogs were curled up with him on the bed, and the only one missing, at least, he thought was the puppy. Anyone else getting deja vu? Because I am. I told him I had the puppy the whole time, and he'd been dozing in my lap for at least an hour now. He hadn't even figured out the doggy doors yet. Husband's face paled, and he said he'd been woken by the sound of the back doggy door, the one leading to the yard. He heard it flapping open. That, followed by the clear sound of a small dog barking twice, and then silence. All the other dogs on the bed had lifted their heads and stared at the door, but none moved. He assumed it was the puppy wandering in, and I suggested maybe he'd dreamed it since he was half asleep. He swore the other dogs were half awake and looking at the door, and maybe I thought it was some stray, and our property's fenced but not completely foolproof. We've had turtles slip under and a fox once, even a cat that stayed for days. A turtle? Well, that's awesome. So I went outside and I searched every inch, and there's nothing. No paw prints under the fence, no disturbed dirt, no sound of retreating paws. The second encounter was just last week. I was again in my studio at the computer, and this time I had 2 dogs in my lap, the puppy and our male stray. The female stray is obsessed with him and always looking for him, and it's normal for her to slip through the doggy doors to find wherever he's gone. I heard the familiar flap of the interior doggy door about 3 feet away. Because of where my chair was, I couldn't quite see it, but I didn't bother turning around. I just assumed it was the female stray looking for the male, and normally I'd hear her nails clicking on the hardwood as she came in. Then the soft sound of the exterior flap when she left again. And this time nothing, no footsteps, no second flap. I called out for her with no answer. Finally I turned to look, and she wasn't in the room. There's nothing. Went to check the rest of the house, thinking maybe she poked her head through and left, but she wasn't anywhere. Why do I recognize this? To explain, our house had 2 exterior doggy doors to the yard, but only the studio has interior ones, and they're smaller than the outdoor flaps, custom-made for the dog I lost. Only she and the female stray were small enough to use them, and meaning if the female stray had been in the rest of the house, she wouldn't have to come through the studio to get back out. There's no other way. The thing is the interior flaps have a totally different sound from the exterior ones. A thinner thwap instead of a heavy flap. I heard the thinner sound as clearly as if somebody had opened it next to my ear. My husband, weeks earlier, had heard the exterior flap and bark. My girl who passed, her bark was high and soft like a puppy's. So I'm at a loss. I'm not one to jump to ghosts, and in 12 years living in this house, nothing like this has ever happened. But 2 strange incidents, both involving the doggy doors custom-made for my old girl, both within months of her passing. I don't know what to make of it. If it were just my husband's story, I would have said it was a dream, but I heard the flap myself. Every dog accounted for. 2 in my lap, rest in the bedroom, no dog in the house. I ruled out drafts and suction from the AC and anything mechanical. We've had the same system for years, and it's never happened before or since. I don't want to say it's her ghost, but I don't have a better answer. Oh, I do have to say that even though I can't quite comment, I do look forward to anybody's comments. It's a highlight of my day. Go on the YouTube comment finder thing and type it in, and warms my heart. Sweet dreams.
Welcome to the unexplored dimensions of Paranormal M, where we share stories that blur the line between reality and the supernatural. Subscribe and hit that notification bell to be part of our journey into the unknown, the most sinister entity I've ever encountered. As a clairvoyant, I've had my fair share of weird and wonderful encounters with spirits and entities. Most have been good, some bad, but I've only ever dealt with a few evil ones. This is a fairly long read detailing my encounters with the witch who tormented me for 5 years in the most horrendous ways. I do not know how she found me, or why she hated me, but I will tell you the first time I ever saw her. I was dreaming I had entered into a small country pub. The ceilings were low, and it had that fusty smell of beer and thyme. Outside the windows was a quiet rural lane surrounded by hedgerows, and what looked like farmers' fields beyond that. It was a lovely warm day, but the scene was eerily quiet. There was 2 sections to the pub. One side which was devoid of anyone and what looked like a working bar, and the other side was closed off to the public and looked like it was being used to store old furniture. I found myself wandering around the furniture, admiring a beautiful antique writing bureau, when I suddenly felt disoriented. My legs started to give way as my head began to spin out of nowhere. My center of gravity was thrown out of whack, and I stumbled onto the floor, and a fear I could not explain started to overcome me. I knew something was wrong, and I had the feeling of being circled by a predator. One I could not see. In a state of panic, I shuffled back on the floor until my back made contact with something solid, an old dusty chest of drawers. And I tried to calm my breathing, not making any sense of why I felt like I was in so much danger. Then I heard a noise above me, a disturbing, croaky death rattle-like sound. I was terrified, but I found myself slowly raising my head to see what was there. I couldn't help it. I shouldn't have looked, but that macabre sound drew my attention like a moth to flame. Slowly, leering over the top of the drawers directly above me, my face came into view of another face looming down over me. It was a woman, strikingly beautiful if not cold-looking. Pale blonde curls pinned on top of her head, icy blue eyes. Young, no more than 30, but her mouth was what was the most terrifying. It was stretched open into a gaping black hole with torn, cracked flesh stretching even further, making her face into a disfigured, warped, horrifying mess. The rattling was coming from within that cavernous abyss. I've never felt a fear like it, the sort which strips your brain of any normal function and sends your gut plummeting. I could barely scream, I was that scared. It was more like a high-pitched, hysterical whimper which barely left my mouth as her face came closer. Then I woke up, sweating, and still trying to scream. As disturbing as the dream was, I thought it was just that, a nightmare, although I've never been able to get her face out of my head all these years later. Roughly 6 weeks later, I had another nightmare, in which I was involved in a vicious assault on the street outside my home. In this dream, the police came, and as I was being pinned to the ground and arrested with the assailants, I noticed a figure walking around the periphery of the circle of police and people. As my face was being pushed into the ground, it was hard to see who it was, but they were getting closer and closer to the tangle of bodies on the floor. As the police pulled me up, I saw it was a crooked old woman, bedraggled and dirty hair hanging in her face, full of debris and dirt. She was in an old-fashioned white nightdress. My stomach lurched, and although she looked different, I knew it was the same woman I'd encountered in my nightmare weeks before. As if she sensed my realization, she rapidly lurched forward between the police holding me in place and sank her teeth into my arm and disappeared, leaving my arm in an immediate septic mess crawling with maggots and decaying. The pain is what woke me up. I bolted upright, expecting to see teeth marks on my forearm as it throbbed, and although there were none in the area, it was red as if it had been pinched. I suspected then that these were not ordinary dreams, and that she was a separate entity, not some reoccurring imaginary figure. I didn't know yet that she was a witch, but the more she encroached into my dreams and life, the more I psychically saw snippets of hers. She had a knack for showing herself. And she would do this in two different ways. One, the young, beautiful woman, although never again with that hideous, deformed mouth. And others, a stereotypical hag. Every few weeks I would encounter her in my dreams, which was where I figured out that she was a dream walker, as I called this gift, not sure if it's the correct term, a spirit or entity that can manipulate someone's dreams. In another dream, she was just standing by my bed, and she was wrapped around my throat, slowly squeezing until I couldn't breathe, until I woke up violently gasping for breath. I had that same experience several times. Another time on my day off work, I woke up and I was feeling lazy. I decided to lounge in bed a little longer, and I was in and out of sleep until I became acutely aware of someone very close to me staring at the back of my head. I knew it was her. Everything inside me screamed, "Do not turn around and look at her." So I stayed still, face pushed into my pillow. And then something peculiar happened. As if I was stood in the corner of my bedroom, I could see everything. Me lying in bed covered up and face down, and hovering about 2 feet above my body parallel to me, there was an opaque brown swirling humanoid mass. Other times I would dream she was hovering above me, and in a half-sleep, half-awake state, too terrified to move, she would reach inside my chest, and I could feel an odd pressure around my heart, squeezing, causing it to beat out of rhythm. All I could do was lie there and pray that I didn't have a heart attack as the thumping of my heart inside my chest would speed up rapidly and then slow down. There were seconds between each beat. I tried putting a protection boundary around my home, but it never seemed to keep her out. In the end, my spirit guides shut me down entirely to protect me from her. I guess being psychically open was what kept the link going between us. The complete radio silence I had for 3 years was eerie, to say the least, and not something I was used to as having random spirits popping in and out. They've been popping in and out of my life for years, since I was 11 years old. It did the job. I didn't see her again for 3 years. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I unintentionally started to open up again. I only had 2 more experiences with her after this, although I was disheartened to know that she was still linked to me. The night she showed herself again, she entered my dream as usual. I was laying in bed, and in this dream, I woke, and my quilt was hovering a few feet in the air above me. Through the gap in the dark between myself and the floating quilt, I could see someone shuffling around the edge of my bed back and forth. The familiar feeling of fear that came with it held me in place, scared shitless of what was going to happen next. To my absolute horror, the figure climbed underneath the hovering quilt at the foot of my bed, slowly worked its way up over my body until she was on top of me and her face was in front of mine. Her hair trailed across my skin, and she smelt of damp earth. Then she spoke. "You thought I was gone," she hissed at me, and all I could do was try and scream myself awake. Suddenly, the quilt dropped back onto the bed and I bolted upright, finally awake. My quilt, which is usually cocooning myself, was stuffed down on the floor between my bed frame and the wall with the window that looked out onto the street. I refused to sleep at my home that next night, telling my friend I couldn't believe she was back after all this time had passed. My last encounter I've ever had with her was odd, to say the least, as it seems as if she couldn't get as close to me as usual. Again in my dream I awoke, and she had me by the throat, both of us dangling in the air over my bed. Here she was her younger self with porcelain skin, fair hair, and all just staring into my soul as I struggled to breathe. I can't explain the look that she had on her face. It wasn't anger, disgust. I don't know, just a cold indifference to me with maybe a hint of defeat. It felt different, and although I woke up struggling to breathe and with a sore neck, I don't think she had actually been inside the room with me. The last I ever saw her, and hopefully ever will, I questioned myself early whether it was a form of sleep paralysis, but I don't know if that wasn't it. I've never suffered with it before or since, and that explanation just didn't seem to fit. I suspect she was trying to stop my heart, or physically scare me to death, but why? As I said, I saw glimpses of her life. I know she was a healer woman in a small community, but over time she seemed to get treated with more suspicion and hatred and shunned out of the area until she was living on the very periphery of society. Maybe once respected, then feared. I have no doubt she was immensely gifted in life, but unfortunately, she's passed over with them the same gifts, fully understanding how to manipulate energy. Hands down, one of the few spirits which straight up terrified me. The Bone Pit. It was in the country, a small village, and the house was on a council estate. We had a row of garages behind our garden, where people on the estate could park their cars, with a few little secretive cubby holes and dens that were hidden by trees and thickets. A kid's dream. The very end garage owned by a local creepy bloke, and it had been vandalized. Somebody had spray-painted Red Rum Believe It onto his garage door. I never knew what Red Rum meant back then. One warm day, about a year after moving in, we were all 11 and my sister 6, a small group of us, consisting of me, my sister, my best friend Gemma, next-door neighbor Kiri, and her cousin Michael were hanging out in one of our dens, shaded by trees, just mucking around as kids do beside the vandalized garage. Michael, being a bit of a class clown, was just stood up doing an impression of one of our more larger teachers at school. My attention was drawn to the ground, where he was standing. The solid, smooth dirt appeared to be moving like fluid. It looked like it was rippling like water. It was the strangest thing. I think it was only me that saw this, none of the others. At least none of the others confirmed what I was witnessing anyway. What came out of my mouth next was even stranger. "We need to dig there," I told them. I couldn't explain what was compelling me to say this. "Something's under there." I continued. They all just looked at me and just started asking why. I couldn't give them an answer. Besides, "We just need to. Something is buried there." I think boredom and just looking for adventure convinced my friends and my sister. They just went along with me, so we found sticks. I had my sister go and pinch 2 spoons from our house, which was only yards away. We began digging in silence, this little circle of mud. They must have thought I was mad. I couldn't explain it. I just knew that there was something under there. Kiri stops because she's dislodged something hard a few inches long. We scrape the dirt off with one of the spoons. We can see it's a bone. One end is all sharp and jagged like it's been snapped. We look at each other a bit spooked, but decide to keep digging to look for more. It's probably an animal bone, Michael tells us. But this weird feeling had come over our little group. Finding more bones the deeper that we go and collect this little morbid pile and start digging a wider circle. But our friends start to dry up. I think there was about 15 bones, roughly. Some were a fair size, others small and broken. We gathered them up, and I remember putting them in a sandwich bag and taking them to school the following Monday. I plonked them on the teacher's desk and informed her that we had found all these bones near my house. I will always remember her face. Like, are these kids for real? Get these gross bones off my desk. She told us that they were probably just animal bones and to put them under her desk. I'm sure they probably went in a bin after we left that day. That's probably all they were. But I think it's curious that if I hadn't seen the ground moving like that we never would have found them. And the fact it was next to the creep's garage didn't help. I only learned a couple of years later that red rum was murder backwards. A bit slow to catch on. I know, but it does make me wonder if someone knew something about him. We never heard any more about it. Little did I know it was the start of something far more terrifying and long-lasting. Possible time loop. Any explanations? Roughly 4 years ago, my sister came to my flat one night to spend a bit of time with me, as we had both been working like crazy and hadn't had the time to catch up. It was just the two of us, and she suggested having a game of cards. Something we've always done since kids. It's a favorite pastime in our house. Once I'd gotten the cards out and started shuffling them, she asked me to look at the time on my phone, as she had work the next morning at 7 a.m. and needed to be home for a reasonable time. She had lost her phone on a night out a few days previously, a terrible habit that she has. I told her it was 6:10 in the evening. She replied, "Okay, well, I'll have to be getting off around, 8:15 to 9 to get my uniform washed and dried, so keep an eye on the time for me." I agreed, and we started playing a bit of rummy to start with. Now, we weren't drinking alcohol or taking drugs. We were just having a relaxed game of cards, chatting about guys and work. The usual stuff, I suppose. Everything was normal. We played cards for what felt like 2 hours, easy. I mean, you can't mistake that length of time when you've had about 16 to 18 hands of rummy. We were in the early stages of playing a game of poker, having gotten bored of the other game. I remember having the weirdest feeling come over me, like the light in the room dimmed, and I distinctly felt an electrical crackly feeling start in the bottom of my spine and creep all the way up to my skull. I looked at her, and she was looking at me all wide-eyed and silent like she knew something was up. I blurted out, "Something's wrong, really wrong." Without blinking or reacting to any which way, she just says to me, "Look at the time," which I thought was strange. I picked up my phone, looked at the time. A mixture of shock and dread creeps over me. "That can't be right. It's not possible," I mumbled out loud to myself, if anything. My phone must have glitched out or something. Getting up to turn on the telly to see what the time's on there. She's looking at me like, what in the hell is going on? "What is it? What's the time?" she asks me again. I just repeat that it can't be right. And as I switch the telly on, the time flashes up in the corner of the screen. It says 18:29. She sees it, and now just as freaked as I am. "Amy, that can't be right. Did your phone say the same time?" I tell her it did. I pull out a laptop to check the time and even get a watch out of my drawer to see if they're all matched, and sure enough, they did. We just sat there in a bit of a fog, like, what on earth just happened? We tried to discuss it, but we couldn't make any sense of it. To be honest, it felt uncomfortable. Even to this day, to talk about it doesn't feel right. She breaks the silence with a joke, something like, "Oh, well, at least I have another couple of hours to chill with you." We just tried to forget about it. I just wondered if anyone had any ideas as to what it was. Something's living in our family home. A little background. This house was built in 1995 by my dad and mom. It's a big house with 2 floors and a basement. We're the only family that's ever lived there. My grandmother died in a bathroom upstairs in 2010. No one else has died in that house besides her. My sister and brother, who I'm going to be mentioning in this story, had moved out of the house before things ever started happening. I moved out about a year ago. Sorry for the grammar, English is not my mother tongue. It started a few years after Granny had died. We started hearing steps going up and down the stairs at night. We were spooked a little, but forgot about it soon because we just thought it was Granny's ghost, since she's the only one who died there, and we had heard those steps very rarely. Maybe a year passes, and I'm looking through pictures of my relatives, and me having sent to each other on Messenger. I found a screenshot that she had taken when we were on a video call at night, and I saw some weird gray mass behind me. I zoomed in and was completely taken back. There was a gray torso and face behind me in the darkness. I put some filters on it so I could see it better. Cropped it because I had an ugly face on the picture and showed it to my family and friends as soon as possible. Everyone except my dad was completely shocked. My dad didn't believe in paranormal at the time and kept denying when stuff happened. My sister said that the gray apparition looks like Granny, and I agreed. I think I may make a separate post for that picture and put a link here too, not sure yet. Anyway, a few years forward. My mom and dad are downstairs cooking something in the kitchen, and I'm on the second floor in my bedroom sitting on my bed. I hear exactly 3 knocks on my door. It's normal that people knock on my door first before entering, but this time, no one opens the door to enter. I just stare at the door for a while and eventually ask, "Who's there?" I get no answer. I call Mom on the phone because I'm spooked. She said that nobody had gone upstairs. I went on to Google about 3 knocks on a door, and I did not like the answers I found. I panicked a bit and just waited until I felt like enough time had passed that it was safe enough to open the door. I went downstairs and told my mom and dad what happened. Dad didn't believe me like usual, but Mom was a bit spooked. By now, I've also seen shadows walk past my bedroom door. Creepy, but nothing special in my opinion. Again, a few years have passed, and I and my mom have moved out. It's a long story what happened and why we moved, but in short, domestic violence. Only my father lives in that house now. The house is empty and freezing most of the time because we live in Europe, and Father travels a lot due to work. It's been also put on sale. Since I moved out, the activity in the house has increased. My father has told my sister that he's been hearing someone walking around, faucets turning on and off, doors opening, etc. He didn't believe in the paranormal before, but now he's experienced the spookiest of it himself. Yesterday, my sister, Mom, and me had met up at the house while Father was at work to just catch up. At one point, my sister informed me that her and Mom were planning on staying the night there, and asked me if I was staying too. I declined because I hate that house, and it makes me have panic attacks. Well, fast forward to today. Sister called me and told me that she was absolutely never going to stay in that house again because of what happened that night, and I was lucky for choosing to go back home. Apparently, she had stayed up a bit late, and at one point she heard someone walking downstairs fast and going into the garage. She thought it was Mom up late, so she wanted to go check what she was doing. To get downstairs, she had to go past Mom's room, and when she did that, she saw that Mom was sleeping. She was spooked. The steps were fast, so how can it be Granny? She went back to bed and couldn't sleep anymore, so she stayed up. After a while, she heard steps again, but this time in the room next to her. It may not seem scary to you because it's just some steps, but after years of thinking that it was our granny and then hearing steps that fast, I would have absolutely obliterated my pants and woke up Mom to invisible sword fight the ghost away. My dog came back for a visit. Cutting to the chase, in October, we lost our dog of 13 years. Her name was Bella, and no, I didn't name her after Twilight, though it was in vogue at the time. As a 2-month-old puppy, she witnessed the murder of her then owner. She was one of 6 pups. Ironically, her brother was adopted by my parents' neighbor. They'd ardently play through the chain-link fence whenever we visited home. I raised her in my first year alone at college. She and I were practically attached at the hip. She accompanied me throughout the 6 years it took to get my frickin' degree, marrying my best friend and moving across the country. I'm trying to express the depths of my love for her, and the words just fall short. 5 years ago, I took up the notion that we needed to adopt a sister for her. I think this was a mildly telepathic moment, but she was 8, and I figured it would be a good kind of close out her last years with a companion. Then she started losing her fur and gaining weight. 6 months after adopting our next dog, her name was Arya, Bella went blind. She had cataracts and undergone diabetes. We were told that the $6,000 surgery might not even work, and we're too poor for it anyway. She was insanely intelligent, and after a bout of depression, coped swimmingly. One day her breath became labored, and I knew that our time was almost up. In the 2 days leading up to her death, we were literally attached at the hip once again. I've got a lot of experience with death and knew she was terrified. I held her in my arms as she took her last breath. After she died, I immediately started looking for a puppy. I wasn't trying to replace Bella. I knew that I never could. I'd raised Bella on my own, and Arya was 2 when we adopted her. I thought it would be good to raise a puppy together. It certainly tested my husband's patience. We adopted Lydia 2.5 weeks after Bella died. She's, well, a puppy and a shepherd mix to boot. The only way to calm her down is to wear her out. Today, while I was at work, my husband took her on a walk, which sufficiently tired her. I'd just done yoga and I was meditating. This is now a rarity since Lydia's always crawling on the mat, vying for attention. But today, she sort of sidled up next to me whilst I meditated. I laid down, and with her on the yoga mat, she was the little spoon and I the big one. Bella and I always fell asleep like this together. I was telling Lydia that I loved her and that it was nice to cuddle her, like I'd done with Belly, my nickname for her. Then I talked about how much I missed Belly. As I talked to her and cuddled her, I felt the unmistakable feeling of a dog's nose nudging me on the thigh. I felt there, thinking it was Arya, but she was on the couch. It's nice to know that, even though I can't hold her, my baby's still there. My friend moved in the night and nobody knows how. I grew up in a house that was well over 100 years old when we moved in. For years, I never experienced anything remotely paranormal. But when I was 13, I moved into the basement. On the first night, I didn't sleep. This isn't uncommon because I'm an insomniac. But this was different. My room was pitch black at night because the only window was tiny. I rolled over in the night and heard my inflatable chair. Yes, It was the early 2000s, and I heard it move as if someone was getting out of it. I felt that someone was standing behind me, watching me, and the feeling didn't abate until I started to see the sunrise. I lived in that basement for 7 more years and had a myriad of experiences. I heard a man and woman arguing in the laundry room when no one else was in the home. I'd set 3 alarms. Again, I'm an insomniac. And all 3 would be turned off in the morning. I'd hear whispers in my ear when I was lying on the couch trying to nap. I saw a shadow figure going up and down the back stairs which led to the basement. But the creepiest experience happened when I was 14. If you hadn't gleaned it yet, I have trouble sleeping, and this is mostly because I'm a light sleeper. Literally anything will wake me up. One night, my friends and I were having a sleepover in our basement living room. My 2 friends and my sister slept together on our fold-out couch. I slept on the recliner, which was in front of my bedroom door. When we woke up in the morning, we found that my friend Kirsten, who'd been sleeping in the middle of the other 2, was gone. My parents were still asleep, and we didn't want to wake them, so we searched the house ourselves. All of her stuff was still there. When we didn't find her, I decided to go into my room and call her parents. I moved the recliner, which was still in front of the bedroom door, propped up against it with no wiggle room. There was no other way into my room. I opened the door and there was Kirsten, asleep in my bed. She had no memory of getting up in the night, and she wasn't a sleepwalker. People have tried to tell me that she must have gotten past me, but that's impossible. I would have woken up if she'd even walked past me, let alone she moving the recliner that I was in to open the door. My sister and I still get chills when we talk about it. Odd, ongoing experience in parents' backyard. My parents built their house in 1974 in a very small, very old subdivision in upstate New York. Next door is a 3-level, 3-family home that was built long before theirs, sometime in the late 1800s. This past fall, my son and I were raking leaves on an unusually warm Saturday afternoon. I enjoyed telling my son about all the trees that are still up and how my friends and I used to use them as bases while playing wiffle ball or kickball back there. My parents don't have acreage, but they do have a pretty sizable backyard. While clearing an area by a tree found close to the back corner of the yard, I came across what appeared to be a small broom. It was severely rusted and seemed to literally be coming out of the tree as the tree seems to be shedding some of its bark. It was very strange. I couldn't believe that it was there for a long time. Someone would have seen it somehow. Anyway, I picked it up and started to feel the bristles. They literally fell out as strings of dirt and just became part of the ground at that point. We took the remnants of it inside to show my mom. She and my dad, who passed away nearly 10 years ago, used to live in that house next door when my grandparents owned it. During that time, she said that the Wheelers, a family living in the first floor of the house at the same time, used to work on cars in that exact same spot before they built the house and put a fence up and so forth. We chatted for a while, threw the old broom away, and finished raking the yard. Ever since that day, my 2 to 3-year-old golden doodle, literally sprints beelines like there's a squirrel there, back to the same exact spot as soon as we get to my mom's house. Barks when she gets behind the tree, stops abruptly, wags her tail uncontrollably, and then nonchalantly strolls through the yard to find a stick, do her business or whatever it is she feels like doing. It never happened prior to that day, and now we just laugh because it's her thing to do when we get there. My very own guardian angel, or so I thought. When I was 11 or 12, my family moved to a house in some woods pretty close to town. It was a lodge, a wooden house. My 2 brothers, sisters, and dad. My mom was in another similar house next to ours, as there wasn't enough space. In the first few days, it seemed good, safe, and even freer than usual. My dad worked on evenings, so we'd be alone in our room doing homework, chatting, and normal stuff. One evening, my dad was gonna stay till morning, so me and my brother got his room. We were in the bed, trying to sleep. It was about 2 a.m. when I heard footsteps next to the bedroom. Thought it was my sister, so I yelled, "Go to sleep, Sarah." No response. The footsteps got closer to the door and it slowly opened. There was no one there. Then I heard footsteps next to the bed. I wasn't scared. I felt safe. I felt like whatever that was just checking up on me to see if I was okay. Footsteps stopped and the door closed. I fell asleep with a smile. I felt safer than ever. My dad came in the morning and I was already awake watching TV on the couch. My dad asked me, "Did Mom check up on you during the night as I told her?" And I found it being a strange opportunity. I answered, "No, someone else did." My dad was confused, so he asked me who it was, and I said I didn't know. We had a short laugh. The next night, everything over again. Dad stayed at work until morning. This time, I purposely stayed up to repeat like last night. I heard a loud bang on the other side of the wall to my left. I screamed, and that woke up my brother. "Josh, what the hell just banged so fucking loud?" "I don't know, just check." I was excited. "Josh, are you sane? It's 2 a.m. "I know, but I really want to know what it was." "Okay, let's go. I'm going to be first in case someone broke in." He grabbed a random broom from next to the door and we went there. There was nothing, and everything was in place. I heard footsteps coming towards Dad's room's door. "Wait!" I yelled, knowing my brother heard it too. "Josh, who are you talking to?" "I don't know, but I hear footsteps coming to our room like last night." Whatever it was next to me, checking up on me. "Are you sane, really?" No. I believe you, but there's certainly a ghost in here, something." We rushed to the room and went to bed. I suddenly felt unsafe, really endangered. I felt like a sniper scope watched me. Felt so wrong. I felt safe the last time, right? The feeling of fright went through my body and suddenly a smell of blood. Like something had just died. I fell asleep as if someone just strangled me. I wake up in the morning and go to make a sandwich as I was starving. I saw something run to the kitchen before me, and I hear a thump as if someone fell. "Sarah, Mike, Ian, Dad, who's there? You okay?" Then I stopped. No one there. I heard the breathing of about 5 people around me. I turned, saying names of my family. My dad walks in. "You called, Bud? You need something?" "No, Dad. Is Mom here?" "No, she's over at her house." "Okay, Then I told him what was happening. He said he believed me, so we sold the houses and moved. Since then, I felt safe. I prayed every morning for 3 years. I was terrified. Now I'm 21 years old. Still talk with Sarah and Ian. Not Mike, he died in a house fire. I want to ask about something weird that happened to me when I was 10. I used to live in Libya, in Tripoli, to be exact. Libya is a really rural country, but I lived in the city, which is like the suburbs in America. My mom's aunt lived in the street next to us. I always went there with my sisters to play with my mom's cousin's children. There were 3 girls, 12, 11, and 2 years old at that time. I was 10, and my sisters were younger than me. I remember we were playing hide and seek. When we were about to start, the oldest of the girls just stopped talking. She looked at us and said, "Hide," but not as in the game, but in real life. She said we have to all hide together. It was just me and my sister, and her younger sister. We hid behind a car and said that we have to peek at the rest of the street. We all looked, and then out of nowhere the whole area we were in was empty with no people or cars. To be honest, it always didn't kind of have a lot of people, but at that time of day, which was the evening, it should have a bit of people and cars, but there wasn't any. We waited for a minute, and she said that we have to make no sound. And then a yellow Camaro came and started doing donuts. I know this might sound kind of weird. To make it even weirder, in Libya, we don't have expensive cars, and a Camaro was really rare to see. After that, I remember me and my sister running home scared. Told her parents, but they didn't think it was weird or anything. What made me scared was how the girls I was playing with, especially the oldest, was acting. She was looking at the car and was waiting for it like she knew it was going to happen. Now, the thing that made me post this and made me remember this whole thing is she was the oldest, and she died yesterday because of a car accident. A yellow Camaro hit her and killed her, and the car ran away. My sister and me remembered this story, and we were really spooked. I'm 16 years old right now. If this has any importance, magic was and still is somewhat popular in Libya, especially in family fights with other families and love spells. That is indeed spooky. Ghost child and family when I was a kid. So to start this story off, my mother was Catholic, and my dad, who knows at the time of this story, he never really talked about it. So when this occurred, we lived in Spring, Texas. I was 3 years old. Weirdly enough, I remember life back when I was around 2. So we moved here when I was 1 from Iowa. My dad got a new job and we had some family down the street. So let me start with the details on the house layout, so you can imagine it somewhat better. It was a blue, square-looking house which was quite poor-looking. Old paint, old wood. You walk into the front door and you're in the living room. To the right was a straight shot to the back door past my room and my mom and dad's room. My room had a door that connected the 2 rooms also. And by the back door was the washer and an open attic where you can look up into the attic back there. Okay, now that I explained the layout, when I was 3, I remember I was going outside sometime in the morning, and I looked up on the way out the back door. I'd seen a kid, about 5 I would say. He just had his legs hanging off the ledge in the attic by the back door. We made eye contact, and I remember not being scared, but I was like, who is that? Weird, and just ran out the back door. Moving on to the next. My room freaked me out. When my mom read books to me, I would fall asleep, and she would just head to her room through the connecting door. The night I had the worst feeling, my blanket was pulled down. I remember waking up in the pitch black, looking down, and then right when I looked down, it ripped my whole blanket off of me. Still to this day, I can feel the fear I felt as a child. I screamed so loud as my heart racing, jumped straight out of bed and went to the connecting door to my mom's room, freaking the hell out. But I brought this up to her and she said that she didn't know I had that happen, saying I was just crying and panicking until I passed out asleep. So, when starting this conversation, she told me that she didn't believe in spirits. until that house. She told me about nights if my dad was working. He did overnight work. And she would hear someone walking through the wooden kitchen clear as day, telling me that she understood that it's old, the houses creak, right? But the part that made this weirder, the back door would get opened. Easy explanation since the house was old, but the door had 2 deadbolts and 1 chain lock, with the door handle lock as well. And while alone, my mom was just worried about people breaking in. She would lock all of them. And every night, all unlocked and open, and she wouldn't leave the room until it was quiet. She ended up telling my dad, but he didn't believe her until a night that he was off of work and it happened again. He said to my mom, "Do you hear that? Someone's in the house walking through the kitchen." And she just said, "That's what I told you had been happening." He grabbed a bat and ran, opening their door, so that way you can see the kitchen and the back door. No one there. The door was still locked. I was told he looked through the whole house checking locks and windows. No one was there. When they went to sleep and woke up, the back door was wide open, all locks off, nothing stolen, nothing in different places. This is where my parents started getting worried. After this experience, she said that the door still was opening. She was watching TV in the middle of the day, Jerry Springer. She heard the walking and she looked into the kitchen and said that she knew it was walking her way. When the noise stopped, she sighed, but she freaked out when an indentation of someone sitting down in the cushion right next to her appeared. When she jumped up, the spot stayed until she ran by it, and when she looked back, the cushion was slowly raising back up. She said she called a priest to bless the house that day, and said I stopped screaming, but still said I did. I did not want to sleep in that room, and that the door and the walking stopped after that. A doppelganger? I've told this to family and friends, and I'm always given a skeptical look, or it brings chills to their spine. It sounds far-fetched, but honestly, it was as real as it can get for me, and that's all that matters. I was around 10 or 11 at the time, and I was in my old home in Millmont, Pennsylvania. It was after school. I spent a few hours just gaming on the first-floor living room. It was only me and my older brother home at the time, since my parents worked the second shift until about 11 p.m. It was around 7 or 8 p.m. when I began to crave one of my favorite snacks. I walked in the kitchen, opened some blueberry Pop-Tarts, and sat down at the kitchen table. I was facing away from the living room at the end table. Now, I need to explain the layout, so you better understand this. Before entering the kitchen, there's a small archway with no door. It leads straight from the kitchen to the living room, extending to around 2 feet of open space on either side after the archway. From the living room continuing straight, there's a staircase to the left, facing away from kitchen view. I was mid-bite of my Pop-Tart when all of a sudden I began feeling what I can only describe as dread, mixed with the feeling of being watched. I kinda shook it off because of it being so random. It made no sense as to why I felt that way, so I just kept eating. I was a few more small bites in when the feeling intensified, and I only had a gut instinct to turn around. I decided to do so when I should have not. I'm going to try my best to describe the finite details of what I saw. When I turned around, I was immediately focused on 3/4 of a face peeking out completely sideways on the right side of the archway. Now this face was completely solid and not transparent. Not transparent at the least. It was the face of my older brother, Jonathan. His eyes were opened wide, unblinking, and staring directly into my own. His face had an absolute sinister smile, an ear-to-ear smile that was almost too far stretched out to be normal. My brother's skin was normally pale, but this face was an extreme pale. Extremely pale for sure, a few shades lighter, almost like a slightly cream porcelain. The face's eyes were the same color as John's, being bright blue, but it seemed almost glossy. It made no noise and never attempted to speak. It just stared at me, unmoving. Now, I have a condition where I get heart palpitations from a murmur I've had since birth. If I'm surprised or get excited too quickly, I get several quick palpitations. I've had it for as long as I can remember. When I suddenly saw that face, I had to clutch my chest as an immense immediate fear and surprise was causing my heart to palpitate several times. I also got a huge lump in my throat. I couldn't scream, I couldn't yell. I just stared widely back in paralyzed horror. What was around 5 seconds felt more like an eternity. The face then pulled back behind the archway at an angle that you wouldn't think possible. For a few seconds, I was terrified, but then I just began trying to rationally think of what I saw in an attempt to pull myself back to earth. In my own mind, I knew it was my brother. It's just his features were a bit oblong, and that smile was more sinister than anything I've ever seen before. I was already used to him pranking me on a weekly basis, so I convinced myself that it was another one of his stupid pranks. I thought to myself that I can also sneak to the archway myself and scare him back, since he didn't walk back to the living room. I knew he was just hiding on the right side of the archway. So I slowly and silently got up from the chair and sneaked my way to the right side of the archway from the kitchen. I reached the edge of it, waited a few seconds, and then jumped out and yelled, "Boo!" However, to my confusion, there was nothing there. There was no way that my brother could have moved away from that position without me seeing, as that part of the hall only came out about 2 feet. I still had visible access to the rest of the living room from the kitchen. I was in shock and confusion when all of a sudden I hear quick walking coming from the staircase on the left side of the living room. I slowly turned towards the staircase and looked up at the sight of my older brother looking back at me with a confused expression. "Dude, who the hell are you yelling at?" my brother said as he peeked over the stair rail at me. He was 13 at the time. I was just in utter shock. I tried to make out words, but I just couldn't. My lip was only quivering. I instead just turned back around, went back into the kitchen, sat down at the kitchen table again, just staring into my Pop-Tarts for about a minute or two. My brother came down the stairs and into the kitchen and saw the blank look on my face and pressed on his questions. I told him everything that I saw, and he somehow believed me. Maybe due to the fear and panic I had when he first saw my face. I was researching online what could have been possible there. I've only been pointed to what is known as a doppelganger. But I saw that they're an exact copy of a living person. And that thing was very close to being exact, but it wasn't 100%. I would say 90% at best. With that stretched smile and the skin tone. Also, my research showed that they're not sinister or evil, but can be a sign of bad luck. But I swear the only feeling I got off of it was dread and a sense of sinister evil. I never saw it again after that day. I wouldn't have told anyone if my wife had not seen it as well. It was July 19th, 2016. I remember the date because we had our annual Christmas in July at my in-laws. And it was a crazy full moon. We had left to head home. We took the back way. We live in a somewhat rural area, so the back way is very dark. No traffic at that time of night, and the speed limit is 60 kilometers an hour. As we're driving along, it's about 5 minutes from home. Out of the corner of my eye towards the forest on the passenger side, I catch a glimpse of something moving fast. The moment my foot hits the brakes, my wife's hand grabs my leg. Getting goosebumps as I type this, as it was a crazy experience. We come to a screeching halt in the road, and whatever it was stopped dead in front of us. It cocked its head to look at us. We both at the time said, "Do you see that?" It was huge. Best guess 7 feet tall. It had yellow eyes that glowed from the headlights. And it was muscular and skinny at the same time. The most memorable feature, though, were its legs. It 100% looked like a dog walking upright, with the cocked angle in its legs. No sooner did it stop and glare at us did it continue to bolt across the road and vanish into the forest on my driver's side. The only way that we've ever been able to describe it was werewolf-like. And like I said, my wife and I both agreed. If we had not both witnessed it, I'd have called myself crazy and never mentioned it. But we both saw it. No question about it. Ghost? Werewolf? No idea, but whatever it was huge, mean-looking, and fast. Ghost trying to make contact with me. Long story. I had some crazy experiences when my family and I moved into our new house. I was 8 years old. The first time I noticed something wrong was the day when I was playing with my new RC car. I played with it in the living room for a few minutes, then took a break to use the computer. I left the controller with the toy car behind me. I then started hearing an odd sound that was happening in bursts. It sounded like a small power tool coming from beneath the house. I sat there confused, looking around, but it stopped. A few minutes later, I heard it again. I turned around and noticed that the long antenna on the RC car was wiggling back and forth. The sound was the car moving by itself. Then there was a time not too long after that, I had another odd experience, and the thought of this one still makes me uncomfortable. One day I was in the family room watching TV. There was a computer swivel chair to my slight left in the room. Suddenly, the chair slowly turned and faced me. It wasn't like the chair had slightly turned. It made a good, decent-sized turn. What's even more odd is that room is known for having an uneven surface, whereas the floor is at a slight slant. The chair swiveled up against the slant towards me. A few months go by, and there was a day when I had family come over and visit. It was at night, and my family was in the family room across the house. I was watching TV with my brother in his room, with the TV to my left and the doorway to the hall in front of me from where I sat. He told me he was going to be hanging out with the family, and I told him I would join as soon as the episode finished. He leaves and I enjoy my time. But a few minutes go by, and I start noticing something. The doorway is in front of me, and it's dark with no light. And when I look at the TV, I can see the doorway from the corner of my eye. As I'm watching TV, I seem to notice a human-like figure standing in the dark doorway. I immediately turned my head and saw nothing there. I figure it's just my eyes playing tricks on me. I go back to looking at the TV, and suddenly I see this figure again. but this time I wait slightly longer before turning to directly look at it. I noticed it was shaped like a woman who was wearing a dress, but no details other than a white shape. I look and it disappears. And at this point, I'm kind of freaking out, but I'm trying to convince myself it's not real. I turn to face the TV once more, and the figure reappears, but this time it's moving. Her hands and arms making a shape, making some gesture. After that, I bolted out of the room and ran to my family. After that experience, I still wasn't 100% sure if what I saw was real, and a few weeks went by. One night, I was hanging out with my sister in her room. Out the doorway of her room, you can see the doorway into my room on the immediate right. We were talking and joking around until something caught my eye. There was a shadow of what seemed to look like the bottom of a dress on the floor in my room, with the rest of the figure being hidden by the edge of the doorway. It looked like the bottom of a window curtain slightly swaying in the wind. Then it moved up, out of my eye's view around the corner of the doorway. I immediately went into my room to check if it was empty. I had no curtains, nor anything fabric that could cause that shadow. I went back to my sister's room and told her what I saw. She didn't really take it seriously and brushed over the topic. Soon after, she looked at me concerned and told me, "Man, you really did see something, huh?" She said that my face was extremely pale. Finally, about a year goes by. One morning I awoke. I opened my bedroom door and my sister came up to me with a deep concern on her face. I ask her what's wrong. She begins to tell me the story of what happened overnight while I was sleeping. She tells me that in the middle of the night, she heard what sounded like our mom outside the hallway, softly calling out my name, "James." My sister found this unusual and called my mom via cell phone to ask if it was her. My mom awoke with a groggy voice saying it wasn't her and that she's asleep in her room. My sister got freaked out and went to my mom's room where she slept the rest of the night. Later on in the same night, my grandmother and grandfather, who live in the back house, went to my mom's room and woke up my mom and sister. They said that they heard a woman crying and screaming in the backyard. After hearing that story, it was like it confirmed everything that I had experienced. Mind you that I kept most of these experiences to myself, didn't share them much. That was the end of it for a while. Never heard or saw anything for years. But there was one last experience. It was 2011, and I was all grown up now, still living in my mom's house. One morning I woke up and went to the living room and began opening the blinds on the window to let the light in. As I'm opening the blinds, I hear my mom calling out for me from across the house. I told her to give me a second as I finish opening up the blinds. I walk to the family room where I heard her, and she's not there. I assume she went back into her room, and I check. Not there either. I then checked my grandparents' house. She's not there, and not in the grandparents' house. I went back to the living room and looked out the window, and I realized that all my family's cars are gone. I was home alone. I called my mom to further confirm that she wasn't home, in fact, and she indeed was not. The voice I had heard calling my name was as clear as day. Didn't even question it in the slightest. That was the last time I came in contact with what seemed to be a woman who had interest in me. I'm not a religious man. Rather, I am a man of science and reasoning, always trying to pick out possibilities before jumping to conclusions. But everything I'd experienced leaves me puzzled. Everything you read actually happened. And even if, I guess even I'm having trouble believing it sometimes. It's simply overwhelming. My imaginary friend Charlie. Back when I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Charlie. From what I remember, Charlie was around from the time I was about 4 years old up until I was 9, when my family moved to a different house. So I spent 5 years talking and playing with Charlie. My parents encouraged it because I didn't have any real friends or siblings, and it wasn't uncommon for a lonely kid to create an imaginary friend to play with. I was a loner, and still very much am today. Charlie told me that he used to live in my house before my family moved in. I believed him because we often played hide and seek, and he knew all of the best hiding spots. He knew things about the house that even I didn't know at that time. A couple of times I asked him where his parents were and why they didn't live in the house with him, and he never gave me an answer. After a year or so, he started asking me to do strange things, like stealing change from my mom's purse, or hiding my dad's car keys so he wouldn't be late for work, or so he would be late for work. Random mischievous stuff like that. When I refused, his requests became much more sinister, telling me to push my mom down the stairs, start a fire in my parents' bedroom. Of course, I again refused. Charlie became more cold, and instead of wanting to play, he only suggested doing things to hurt me or my parents. I was scared of him. I never told my parents what he said, only that I didn't want to play with him anymore. When we moved out of that house, I didn't bring Charlie with me. I forgot about him for many years, until a few days ago, when my mother asked me if I remembered having an imaginary friend growing up. That's when all of this started to come back to me. I did some research into this history of this old house, and found that there was indeed a young boy named Charles whose family lived in the house about 15 years before mine, and apparently died at a young age, but I couldn't find any info as to how or where he died. Stories from my old house. I'm currently 18, and I've been living in my house for, I'd say, about 8 years now. My family, which includes at the time my 2 sisters and my mother, moved in with my Nana because of a few reasons I wouldn't want to bore you with. But for the first 10 years of my life, we lived in a house where so many unexplained things happened. Even since us moving, a few horrible things have happened there, which I won't go into detail about, possibly later. Firstly, this was before I was born, and when I was a newborn. My elder sister, who was 3 when I was born, had a friend that she played with in the house. She described her as a skinny, blonde-haired girl. She distinctly remembers her having a mole on her left cheek. My sister is also blonde, so when my mother saw a young blonde girl dash past her doorway, she would assume it was my sister. Only until she realized that my sister was in the same room as her. My sister would just blabber on about her friend to my mother quite frequently, saying how much she liked to play with her. Another time, my mother was asleep on the couch. She said it was around 9 or 10 at night, and she was awoken suddenly by a man she'd never seen before, screaming her name in her face. She still says it was the most terrified she's ever been, and has called the police as well as my dad, who's at work at the time, to come home. The house was searched, but no sign of anyone. There was even times where my mother would lose her keys or phone or whatever, check somewhere, for example, the kitchen side. They wouldn't be there, She'd go look somewhere else and then come back into the kitchen to find whatever she was looking for sat in a place she'd already searched. In my own experience at that house, I'd hear tapping on the walls, footsteps. But I'm a person who thinks rationally and logically, so I pass these off. Yeah, I can't explain my personal experiences, but not as clueless as to immediately say that it was something paranormal. I agree, Gecko. A few years back, however, my mother got a message on Facebook from the people who moved in after we left, asking if anything weird happened there when we lived at the house. So some weird stuff must have happened to them, too. It's pretty depressing because everyone in my family has some memory of that something strange was happening at that old house apart from me. Well, if you don't count the tapping and the footsteps. But being in the house did feel unsettling. And I even thought of the idea of cold spots and a haunted place as a bit of a cliche, but there would be times where you'd suddenly feel cold. Deceased family members saying one last goodbye. Now, before I continue the stories, I'm going to recite that they might not have occurred exactly how I described them, since both of the stories I'm going to tell happened when I was pretty young. Nevertheless, here are two stories that didn't happen to me, but happened to both my grandmother and my sister. Back in 2006, my granddad passed away, and at the time I would have been 4. But as someone who has a terrible memory, I can still remember him pretty well. When he passed away, it hit everyone pretty hard, and my Nan, for the first time in her life, now lived by herself. My Nan used to have a queen-sized bed, which essentially had bedside tables connected to it, as well as a headrest which was big enough to hold pictures and small ornaments. So basically it was pretty big. On the 2 bedside tables, there were 2 huge lamps, which turned on and off whenever you touched the lamp itself. It didn't have a switch. One night, not too long after my granddad passes away, my Nan was just laying in bed when the lamp next to where my granddad would sleep lit up and then turned off. She brushed it off as something possibly leaning up against the lamp, but then it happened again. So, she was understandably pretty spooked. She decided to ask if it was my granddad, and the lamp turned on. My Nan began to cry, began to say various different things, and she was getting a response as the lamp turned on and off. She recorded it happening, but considering it was 2006, and I'm unsure what she even recorded it on, I've never seen the footage, but both my mom and Nan for both said that it exists. In the unlikely event that it ever gets found, I'm definitely 100% posting it. As a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, I hope that it would possibly make me into a believer. Around 2011, my gran passed away, and at the time, she was not in a position both physically and financially to live on her own. So she lived with my dad right up until she passed away. My parents split when I was really young. So when we would go to see him, I would sleep in his room, which was pretty big enough for an extra bed, and my sister slept in another room. But when my gran passed, my older sister slept in her room from then on. One day she opened the door to go to sleep, only to find my gran sat on the edge of the bed. I clearly remember her running into my dad's room in tears, screaming, saying that she saw my gran. I remember my dad trying to calm her down, and when he went into the room himself, he saw nothing. My sister was terrified of going back in there and subsequently didn't spend weekends at my dad's for a very long time. I'm both grateful, but also pretty annoyed that I've never encountered anything like this. probably really shit me up. I'm the sort of person who hates horror films, so I'd rather not have an experience like this, but then again, I always brush off stories because I myself have never experienced anything relatable in any way.